One of the things I love about our world is its cultural diversity. I love experiencing other cultures. I love learning about other cultures. I love being in international airports where multiple languages are being spoken, and you get the sense of the sights and the sounds of the cultures of the world. I like the food of other cultures. Although eating, sheep's head in South Africa was not a big hit with me. But I love Mexican food. Mexican food fans here? All right. Moving from San Diego to Hawaii has been an adjustment. I love Vietnamese food. I love Korean food, of course. I really like, just basic Hawaiian barbecue. It's kind of funny because when I lived in LA, I loved eating at L&L. And I don't really eat there anymore. But one of the things I liked so much about eating there is if you're in Southern California, if you go to L&L, they always have newspapers from Hawaii. And they're like a week or two old. But I would always go, I would eat there, and I would find the sports section, and I would catch up on the sports scene in Hawaii. And I don't know why, but I just really enjoyed that when I lived in LA. I like the sports of other cultures. When we were in England, I really liked being able to go to a pub and just taking in a Premier League, soccer match in England. When we were in Australia, I got the chance to go to the main cricket ground in Melbourne and take an international cricket match. Really enjoyed that. I still like to follow Aussie rules football. I love New Zealand's rugby team, the All Blacks. I just like the sports of different cultures. I like the music and the dance of other cultures. When I was young, I loved to dance. And one of the things I loved most, I spent 6 weeks in Kenya with the Maasai. And I just loved being with them and seeing them dance as they worshiped and celebrated. Years ago, when our family visited Hawaii, I remember just seeing hula and really being struck by it and wanting to learn more about it. And after our visit, when we returned to California, I would go online, I would go and watch videos from YouTube of the Merry Monarch Festival. And just really enjoyed having a chance to see that. I love the cultural diversity of our world. And as I've mentioned before, my family reflects this diversity. My younger sister and her family, who are here today, in fact, they live in Australia. And my brother and his family live in India, where his wife is from. His wife's from Calcutta. One of my older sisters, she and her family just got back from 6 weeks in Mozambique, Africa, where her husband is from. And as most of you know, my wife, Cindy, is Korean, was born in South Korea. So there's quite a bit of cultural diversity within our family. And when Cindy and I found out that we were moving to Hawaii, one of the things I was most excited about is the cultural diversity here. I was excited to come to a place where McDonald's serves Spam and Portuguese sausage. That's different. I was excited to come to a place where our Hapa-sons would be surrounded by many, many like them. Cultural diversity is a gift. And cultural diversity is a barrier. I graduated from Pasadena High School, Pasadena, California, and the lesson I learned there is that you stick with your tribe. Pasadena High School, very diverse, culturally, ethnically, socioeconomically, significant African American segment of the students, after that Hispanic, after that Armenian, and Caucasian. There were a real mix of tribes on that campus. And as I see it, you can map out a high school based on where the different tribes eat lunch. And I ate lunch with a certain tribe, pretty much the same spot every day. And sometimes there was conflict between the tribes. I remember one time I was walking with my friend Miles, and this girl came up to him and said, "Are you Mexican?" I said, "No, I'm Iranian." And she said, "Good, because the Mexicans are going to get their kick today." And sometimes the police would come on campus because there would be these fights that were ethnically, culturally based. You stick with your tribe. That's what I learned in high school. And that's what we still see in our world. Our church in San Diego partnered with a local elementary school, and we provided 50 Thanksgiving dinners every year and 50 Easter dinners every year, and once a year we hosted a barbecue on campus and invited all the students and families to come. So I got to know the principal of the school. We did this for several years. And one time I was talking to the principal, and he said to me, "You know why this school has so few Caucasian students?" He said, "Because when white parents visit our school and they see over 90% students of color, they're scared to send their kids here." After moving to Hawaii, Cindy and I decided to check out several different elementary schools just to see what was available. And while Cindy was in the office of one school, she mentioned that we were looking at this possibility of this other school. And an office worker said to her, "Why would you do that? Why is that so popular? You know that's a Howley school." And Cindy thought but didn't say, "Well, obviously you haven't met my husband." If we take an honest assessment of our world as a whole, we see that ethnic and cultural differences divide us. That was all the more true in Jesus' day. In the ancient world, folks most definitely stuck to their tribe, and in many ways had to. You know, the broader Roman society of the day was extremely divided. Your status was set at birth, and it couldn't be changed. At the time, Cicero wrote, "Rank must be preserved." There was a very clear pecking order, and it had to be maintained. At the bottom of the pecking order were the slaves. A step up from the slaves were those who were free. Only those who were free could wear what was called the freedman's cap. A step up from the free were citizens. Only male citizens could wear the toga virilis, the toga of manhood. A step up from citizens were equestrians. Equestrians could wear not only togas, but also a gold ring on their fingers as a sign of their status. These rings were so much associated with this particular group that sometimes it was referred to as the Order of the Rings. A step up from the equestrians were senators in the senatorial class. They were at the top of the pecking order, and they were able to wear togas, gold rings, and to have a big purple stripe on their toga. There was a clear barrier between each tribe, and this barrier was enforced by what you could wear. The same kind of pecking order applied to the kind of work that you did. You had landowners, and underneath them you had manual laborers, and underneath them you had slaves. Your occupation defined your status. You know, at public events like the theater, you didn't sit by how much your ticket cost like we do today, but you sat according to your rank. Those higher up in the pecking order sat closer to the stage. At dinner parties, all guests were seated in order of their status. Everything about this society divided people. Then along came a carpenter from Galilee. And he blew up these dividing barriers by creating a new community in which everyone is family. Slaves and senators, family in Jesus. Landowners and manual laborers, family in Jesus. Do we realize how world-changing that is? In Ephesians 2, which we just heard, Paul addresses this issue head-on. Here's this church in Ephesus that is seeking to be connected, seeking to experience the gift of community. But the biggest issue that is dividing them is cultural diversity. In particular, the clash between Jews and Gentiles. Jews stuck to their own tribe, and in fact were set apart from all others by the mark of circumcision. They saw Gentiles as outsiders, excluded from the members-only family that they belonged to. Well, Gentiles, for their part, thought of Jews as a strange little tribe, kind of dismissed them. Gentiles looked on Jews as atheists because they didn't have any statues to their gods. Culturally speaking, there were huge barriers between Jews and Gentiles. And these barriers were causing conflict in this church in Ephesus. So Paul addresses this issue head on. And notice that Paul doesn't write, "Can't we all just get along?" Thousands of years of history have shown us that we all just can't get along. And Paul doesn't say, what you all need is more education. We can fix this problem with some sensitivity training. You know, I think it's almost kind of comical how our society sees education as the quick fix whenever there is an ethnic or cultural clash. If a person says something racist, we make them take a class on cultural sensitivity. This was just in the newspaper like 2 or 3 days ago, even here in Hawaii. Now, I'm all for education. It is a good thing. It is a helpful thing. It is a necessary thing. But it doesn't transform hearts. See, Paul actually doesn't write anything about us initially. First and foremost, he writes something about Jesus Christ. Paul says that Jesus Christ has destroyed the barrier that divides us. Paul points to the cross and says that on the cross, all of the hostility that we have, all that divides us, was put to death. According to Paul, Christ himself is our peace. I think that's a striking statement. He doesn't write, Christ provides peace. Doesn't write, Christ is the path to peace. He writes, Christ himself is our peace. See, on our own, we are divided. We're divided by basic cultural practices at one level. You know, I served a Korean American church in LA, and we shared a campus with a predominantly Caucasian congregation. And there were always clashes. In fact, we had to bring in a mediator one time to deal with these clashes between the churches. But sometimes they'd be over real basic stuff, like, you know, your kimchi is really stinking up our kitchen. Can you do something about the kimchi? We got a kimchi problem here. You know, even something as basic as the food we eat can become a clashing point. We can also be divided by cultural values. We have different values depending on the culture that we come from. And those differences are real. You think about time. Some cultures approach time on the clock, right? If we're starting at 2 o'clock, you know, you start at 2 o'clock. Some cultures, you know, watches are optional. You're going to start when everyone gets there. One way isn't right. They're different. But those differences can cause clashes. We can also be divided by past hurts or injustices. And in fact, this is the greatest point of tension and division. My wife's parents lived in Korea under Japanese occupation. It's a point of conflict. Many Japanese Americans experienced internment camps. If you look at my ethnic heritage and ancestors, you come to the practice of slavery. And I have to own up to that in my background. You know, at the end of worship today, we will sing the Queen's Prayer. The prayer of Queen Liliuokalani, who was placed under house arrest during a coup that was led by the grandson of American missionaries. there are significant and real barriers that can divide us along ethnic and cultural lines. And according to Paul, Jesus Christ laid down his life on the cross in order to deal with those barriers, in order to absorb them upon himself so that there can be forgiveness and so that there can be reconciliation, in order to break down the walls that divide, in order to make us who belong to his family one. See, Paul writes, his purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace. Jesus died to get rid of the same old, same old. Jesus died to create something new, a new community that is unlike anything the world has seen. A new family in which we're reconciled to God and to each other. A new way of being connected that reflects the newness of God's kingdom. So practically speaking, how do we pursue this new community that Jesus has formed? Because we're always going to be a work in progress. We're always going to be a work in progress. But practically speaking, how do we step into it? I want to mention just two ways. First, we choose to be bridgers. You know, according to Robert Putnam, sociologists distinguish between two kinds of connections: bonding and bridging. Bonding happens when two folks who are similar develop deeper connections. So if we're both from Seattle and we're Seahawks fans, we can bond by watching reruns of the Super Bowl. That sounds like a good idea, actually. Bridging involves folks who are different from each other and normally separated. Bridging connections are, by definition, outward-looking and encompass people across diverse social and cultural lines. When young and old come together in our church, when rich and poor come together in our church, when Democrats and Republicans come together in our church, when different ethnic and cultural groups come together in our church, that's bridging. And I'm so thankful for the bridgers that I've met and I see here in our church and in Hawaii. You know, one author writes, Jesus is the greatest bridger the world has ever seen. Whenever the church has understood his heart, it has become a community like nothing else the world has ever seen. What opportunity might God give you this week to be a bridger? At school, at work, in your command, in your neighborhood. That's one practical step we can take this week to simply choose to be a bridger. Second, I think to pursue this step, we must choose to give up comfort and control. As I mentioned, for 5 years, I served as the pastor of a Korean American church in LA. And I'm really thankful for those 5 years because they helped me see what it's like to be an outsider from the dominant culture of a church. See, when you're in the majority culture, say a Caucasian in a predominantly Caucasian church, you don't even think about the culture of the church. It's like, what culture? We're just doing church the way church is done, and we welcome all. When you're in the dominant culture, it's hard to see how others may feel isolated or excluded. Now for Cindy, for my wife Cindy, being in a Korean American church was an unexpected gift. For the first time in her adult life, she was surrounded by people like her and people who understood her immigrant experience right away. She was surrounded by people who got it. She didn't have to explain anything about herself. They understood it. They got it. They knew what it was like to be a Korean American. There is a reason why like attracts like. There is a reason why Sunday morning is one of the most segregated hours of the week. The difficulty is that in a culturally diverse church, we don't get it. Our histories are different. Our stories are different. Our cultures are different. And we have to be willing to learn and to teach, to forgive and to be forgiven. We have to be willing to give up control. The control that comes with maintaining our traditions, of doing it the way we've done it. Because if we're coming from different cultures, those are going to be different. We have to be willing to step out of our comfort zones. Because if we're with new people, new cultures, who've had new experiences different than ours, that's going to require stepping out of our comfort zone to experience the newness that God is inviting us into. Now, at this point, some of you may be thinking, I kind of like comfort. I kind of like church being comfortable. Is this pursuit of cultural diversity really worth it? I got to tell you, I really think it is, with 100% of my heart. I'm passionate about a lot of things, and this is right up there. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And I believe one of the defining marks of a disciple of Jesus Christ is that they embody racial reconciliation. They understand the kingdom of God and the diversity that it enfolds, and they pursue that and they live that out. And we're called to do that as a church, because I really think that our society is longs for that kind of diversity. Longs, and I know Hawaii's way ahead of the mainland, but we've all got steps to take. We've all got ways to grow. As I mentioned, when the children were up here, the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, describes what the world will be like when God's kingdom finally comes on earth in its entirety, in its fullness. Here's that description once again. I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and people and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, and crying out, "Salvation belongs to our God." The future, the destiny of the church isn't segregation. It isn't churches divided along ethnic and cultural lines. It's complete integration. It is the most culturally diverse community you can imagine. See, and our gift and task is to live out God's future in the world now. Our gift and task is to model racial reconciliation in a world that is often divided by race. Our gift and our task is to show the world that Jesus Christ is our peace. Amen.